Come with me on an idle ride as we watch The Last of Us together.
Can't be any worse out there, can it? I can take care of myself.
How many close calls have we had?
Ellie! Stop! Stop!
Fucking touch me!
It's okay. It's me. It's me. It's me. Look. Sweet Jesus.
Doctor?
What are you doing in here? This is our future. Think of all the lives we'll save.
I struggled for a long time with surviving. And no matter what, you keep finding something to fight for.
Welcome to Idle Ride, a podcast dedicated to casual enthusiasm for all things pop culture. I'm Marcy, your host, here with my chosen brother, Paul.
Hey everybody, I'm Paul.
To discuss the 8th episode of The Last of Us TV series titled When We Are in Need. The episode in which Joel and Ellie meet some cannibals. I guess that's my synopsis. But, I mean, it's a super memorable chapter of both the game and I think of the TV series. So I'm excited to get into it because there's, again, a lot to talk about as always. So we start off with kind of a wide shot of a desolate winter landscape with like a few houses here and there, but everything is under snow. I get a kind of almost like a home-like feeling from this, even though they're supposed to be kind of desolate, because I was born and raised in Alaska, and so winters very much look like this in Alaska, and it doesn't necessarily mean this is really bad to me when I see those kinds of scenes, but I imagine to everyone else it would be like, oh, this is gonna be bad.
Yeah, no, it mostly feels comfortable to me.
Oh yeah, wind and snow, they can walk out, you get that fresh-faced, brisk feeling from the cold, but for Ellie and Joel, I'm sure it's the opposite of that feeling. Also, they're, starving, so there's that.
And no central heating in the place they crashed.
And then they do kind of a zoom in shot on a sign that says Silver Lake, Colorado, and then also Todd's Steakhouse. And this is a very classic building from the video game, Todd's Steakhouse of Cannibal Meat. I mean, we all know what this is if you've played the video game. We've been waiting for this episode. There's a scene in this episode that I think has burned itself into every person who's played The Last of Us's brain.
Especially if you died a lot.
Yes. If you did not push whatever button it was, probably like X, like, come on, X. Anyway, we'll talk about it later. But you all who play the game, you know what I'm talking about.
You know.
And then you go into the building, a preacher is saying some verses from the Bible, and in the background we see a big banner that has written on it, "When we are in need, he shall provide." And I'm already like, nope, now this is not the place for me. This is a bad place, especially when we start off with scripture. And it's so funny because to you and I, the desolate wasteland of the snow is like the comforting feeling. But for most people, a pastor giving scripture would probably feel comforting, right?
I suppose that is true for 80% of Americans.
Well, welcome to a podcast where you're talking to kind of a minority of sorts in regards to faith. You're seeing a gentleman talking, you don't know his name, but this is David, the main villain of this episode, and he is talking to his flock, and I don't know where they got these actors. Every single one of them is like bug-eyed, wan features. They obviously look like they're depressed.
Yeah, there's no Hurley from Lost here.
Exactly. It's what you would imagine you would see if a community was starving to death. Mm-hmm. They picked the right people, and they probably also did an incredible job with the makeup, because I didn't know that they had makeup on, but there are some techniques that you can use to make somebody look like they're more emaciated than they necessarily are. So I think they did a great job of making this community look cowed, look starving, and you could see how someone could take advantage of these people who are in a really terrible place at this point.
Yeah, and to get into some of what they talk about in the scene, David, who is actually the Goliath in this episode, is asked, when will we bury him? So they're talking about, we find out later, the guy that Joel killed when he was, stabbed from behind with a broken baseball bat. He answers with, the ground is too hard, we can't bury him, which is just a really cute excuse for, like, sorry guys, you already ate him.
Or we're going to eat him tonight.
We're going to eat him tonight, yeah. There won't be a body to bury.
They basically are upset that he's died, and he's giving a eulogy for this guy who was killed by Joel. And everybody's sad. He's had a wife and a daughter, and the wife and the daughter definitely look meek kind of in this scene. So they're really setting the stage in this first scene with him being the only person that's standing. Everybody else is sitting, bowing their heads. They are his meek following flock.
And he notices that he's probably not winning anybody over because he's delivering the same speech again and again and again, which is why he has to go off book and be like, how many times have I given this speech? You know the next line. Like,
yep, you're all dying.
Yep.
And I'm still really not doing anything about it, but God will provide,
yeah,
right?
Look at my banner.
I also noticed that every one of the characters seem to have this collared shirt covered by like a sweater vest or a sweater. Yeah. And the showrunners are just doing an amazing job of getting the feeling of, conformity with how people are dressed. We've got the women kind of mostly in overall dresses and the men wearing these collared shirts and sweater vests over them. That's what I think of when I think of a church. Every day, these people are going to church with this fucking psycho preacher, basically.
And we'll get into why he's a psycho preacher later.
And it doesn't take very long to get there. Another thing to point out is in the scene, the preacher David is talking to his second-hand man, and that guy's name is James, but the actor is actually Troy Baker, who was the voice actor for Joel from the game, and he kind of plays the mildly sympathetic cannibal who's a little bit doubtful, though he still goes along with everything, so it's not like he's super sympathetic. But there are definitely a couple of line deliveries that if you listen closely, you can hear Joel from the game in it. It's usually when he starts actually getting upset and he says curse words or something. That's when you hear Joel from the game. And every time I hear it, I go, ooh, it's Joel. But then you're like, oh no, it's that creepy psycho cannibal.
This is the Joel from the bad times where he did bad things.
Yeah, there you go. Everyone is walking out of Todd's steakhouse. The pastor's doing the pastor thing where he's like shaking everybody's hands, telling them goodbye. Him and James sort of start talking. And again, he says something, a line like, how much do we have left? He's talking about food of venison, elk, and rabbit. And Paul early on told me that there's a specific definition for venison. So can you go over that a little bit?
So I watched a tasting history at roughly that time, and it was completely unrelated to the episode. But venison... venison...
Sorry.
It's fine. Venison...
Tasting history of cannibals. So, okay.
Venison derives from Latin venari, which means to hunt or pursue, and therefore it meant any kind of animal that you would hunt or pursue, which could be bears, boars, rabbit, and, of course, people hunt people, so...
Yeah, I feel like you came across this term, and suddenly I see why they're using it in this moment, and in all the further moments. It is their code word for human meat.
Yeah, because I think normal people would just be like, yeah, it's deer. I got deer.
Yeah, exactly, because we only, in America, use venison to mean deer. I don't know why I was so excited to learn this definition of venison so that I could be a part of the code. I'm sure everyone else can tell by the looks and stuff that people are giving that, of course, they're talking about human meat. But I was like, yes, Paul,
and
you're so smart.
It's not like this never happens. There's other code words for human food. There's long pork.
Ooh, yeah, gross.
I've watched enough horror movies to know that there's a lot of code words for, we're eating people.
Oh, long pork? Ugh. Okay, we don't want to talk too long about that.
Nope, we want to talk about men without hats.
Again, all the men don't wear hats. I'm just really frustrated with this, even though I get why they do it in a television show because they want to see people's faces and things. I think it's just easier for people to emote, maybe without wearing a hat. But I don't know. It's just, I can't stop seeing that no one is wearing hats
Yeah, it
in
kind
this
of
cold weather.
It felt weird to me because I was usually the one person without a hat up in Alaska. People wear hats generally, and if they don't, it's because they're big and they overheat easily.
Exactly. And these guys are
They're
starving
to death. They're not
starving to death. Yes, they're not warm.
No.
I do have a line from the television show where James and David are talking, because this is the line about the venison. I guess this gives you a good idea of their personalities in one clip.
James. Yeah. I sensed doubt in there.
They haven't lost faith in you, David. They're just scared.
Not from them.
I still believe. It's been, the last 6 months have been hard.
For all of us. But I need to know you're with me.
Yeah. Good.
Now go get our guns. We're going hunting.
Yeah, so you can really hear also in this clip some of those Joel from the game tones coming out of Troy Baker's mouth. And I, again, have a hard time, not wanting to like him, but at the same time, this is his personality in this whole episode, which is, yeah, I might, kind of doubt a little bit, but I'm still not going to do anything about it. And yeah, it's been a rough 6 months because you've been literally butchering humans, so...
Yeah, that has to take an emotional toll.
I imagine he's pretty beat down at this point if the preacher has gotten him to do these types of things. You can't really come back from chopping up other people and eating them.
Yeah, you wrote in the notes later about, is he happy to be dead about someone? And I was like, when I was rewatching the scene, I was thinking, look at this whole party of people who will soon be dead. And I think everyone, including them, is okay with that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so then we get to a cut of Ellie taking care of business, basically. She starts out nursing Joel. I honestly thought she was going to, choose some food and then put it in his mouth for him, like a bird.
I thought that too.
But she didn't. She ate and she left him some food. She's thinking really hard about what her next moves are, and she knows that they're not going to last without food, so her next order of business is to go hunting.
When she leaves the house, they do a shot of where you see the barrel of the rifle coming out of the door. And Andrew just left on a trip recently, and this is how I feel whenever I'm alone in the house, that I have to leave the house on high alert and got to make sure all the doors are locked. Generally, we do not lock our doors, and I got to protect my dog babies and myself from any possible violence. I wish that more women didn't feel the way that I feel, but I think it's pretty common when you're home alone to kind of be on a little more high alert than maybe a man feels when they're alone. But maybe someday women won't feel so scared of men.
Yeah, that's the dream. I definitely can say that if I am home alone and something happens, there's a loud noise, the power goes out, basically anything, I go into that mode. So she goes out hunting, and one of the first things that she spies is a white rabbit, and she tries to take aim, but she's a little bit slow and misses her opportunity. She trips, and then there's some sounds, which Marcy rightfully wrote in the notes sounds like a clicker, and then suddenly she sees a deer, which it's not a great way they did that, I think. I was considering what it could possibly be that's not a clicker, and I know that moose, when it's this time of year, winter, they've lost the velvet on their antlers, they will scrape their antlers against bark to get the velvet off, I think. And also it makes a sound that's kind of a scrape on wood is sort of like a clicker, so maybe the deer's doing that. I don't know.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. It could have also been that moments ago it's a male deer, so maybe he was fighting.
Yeah, could have been that.
Click, 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 with another deer, and their antlers were clicking together.
Yeah, it just felt like they were trying to fluff our mood for the zombies coming or something. So she shoots the deer, and it's a pretty good shot. It goes down on all fours. It looked kind of like a lung shot maybe, and then it gets up and runs away, which is like the worst, most annoying thing that they can do after you've shot a game animal, which, I mean, good for them for trying to survive. They're already mortally wounded, but they don't know that. But it leads to this classic situation where you have to follow the tracks and you don't know where it ends up.
I just want to talk a little bit about how this sequence makes me feel when I was watching it. Again, because you and I come from sort of a cold region of the United States, I like playing games where you're in the cold. And one of the best games that I've played that makes you feel like this sequence makes you feel is called The Long Dark, where you crash land in a cold location. There has been sort of a post-apocalyptic thing happen to the world, and you're searching for a way to get out of this region. And literally your 4 health meters are warmth, fatigue, water, and food. So you're constantly trying to make sure your character is fed, has water, is warm, and is sleeping when they need to sleep. And I really like the feeling of that game because you're alone a lot of the time. There's not a lot of characters. It felt a little bit like the old Myst game too, because you were just following puzzles and by yourself a lot in the Myst games. It also kind of reminded me of Frostpunk, which we both played before, and you can choose to do things like amputate people's parts to keep them alive or study better hospitals, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's all these trade-offs that you have to make at just about every point of the game. Do you go militaristic to stop people from rioting, or do you go religious? What are the complications that come up from those choices? Yeah,
so I feel like if you like these sequences in this show, then you should try out those 2 games, The Long Dark and Frostpunk.
And if you want to go literary, perhaps the best book, in my opinion, about dealing with the consequences of cold is Jack London's To Build a Fire.
Oh, yeah, that is a great book.
And he does not kill the dog, so it's okay.
That's right. That dog is going to help you keep warm.
So yes, Ellie, following the deer, ends up seeing 2 dudes who are about to just not dine and dash, but dash with the food. And so she gets them by surprise, and she does a deep voice because it's always intimidating to do a deep voice.
I couldn't help but notice that moment when she's like, "Stop right there!" So she really adds a little deepness to it. So I had a question for you, Paul. Do you feel like you change your voice for different situations or change how you talk or speak?
Absolutely. I don't ever do it consciously, but sometimes I hear myself. Yeah, if I'm trying to sound competent or, being asked a technical question, I'll just give more like, and if it's like, if I'm flirting, I definitely have a different voice. Yes, I very much have different sounds that I make.
I know that I do, first of all, because I edit this podcast, and Paul is a lot easier to cut because your tone stays a little bit more even than mine. But at work, I certainly do change even my own personality, I feel like, to match what needs to happen for a patient. And at this point, I don't even consciously do it, but it was something that my teachers talked about in school called therapeutic use of self. So you're basically just using all the social skills or things that you know about the person to somewhat manipulate them to do what's best for them.
The only good type of manipulation.
There are expectations because this is a primarily male-dominated society, even for things like podcasting. Andrew started telling me about this idea that there would be like vocal fry and that women's tones are more dynamic, and so they're not ideal for podcasting or whatever. And I didn't even realize that kind of prejudice
It's baked into our infrastructure, Marcy. Like, in the 1920s, they designed communication channels so that male voices transmitted perfectly, which made females sound tinny and shrill, which is where the whole idea of shrill comes from.
Yeah, it's crazy. We need to stop the patriarchy from doing this.
Yes.
I just watched a video, too, about Sheryl Crow, who put together the Lilith Fair, because literally the male-dominated music overlords said that you know, if you have a female who's the main event, the opener can't also be female. So you can't have two women singing at the same time at a show.
Too many vaginas on the stage.
Yes. Or you can't play two women in a row during, like, on the radio. And I didn't realize this is a thing. Just think about us as women. Like, right now, we're so lucky. There was so much work done by the women before us to allow us to have two women singing a song back to back on the fucking radio. Anyway.
That's amazing. I have learned something.
All right. We can move on from that, but David says, just give me 10 seconds. And that's what the posse said. We give you 10 seconds to explain yourself.
You're right. It's like this is the standard post-apocalypse etiquette of giving someone one chance, 10 seconds, their equivalent. And she does not want to give it to him, but he uses his whatever pastor charisma he has to force her to listen to him.
Ooh, this is interesting. You saying that, pastor charisma, makes me think of this in D&D terms. Because you and I probably, as D&D characters, would automatically be skeptical of a religious person unless our characters, like, were religious.
Well, yeah, and you always kill the healer first, so he's the one I'm going for.
But I like the idea of him being the big boss. We don't see a lot of big bosses in this in terms of the zombies. We get one in this season. So he is a big boss, which means his stats are pretty stacked, probably in charisma and wisdom. And Ellie
and he was a math teacher, he said, so he can't be stupid.
Yeah, logic. What would we say? Lawful chaos, evil? Lawful evil?
I'd go for lawful evil, sure.
Yeah. And Ellie's stacked in intelligence and dexterity, and she sees through his veneer. I think even in these moments, unfortunately, I also think she's still trusting a little bit of people when she shouldn't be, because in this moment I feel like Joel probably would have just killed both these guys.
Yeah, so maybe we could also add in that she's being practical because she has a hunting rifle, which means she gets one shot and then they can be on her from that distance. So
it's true. I mean, she does all the right things. She asks them to disarm.
Later on, she'll take all the bullets out of the weapons that they'd put on the ground.
Where he gets her is offering her something to live. She basically says, do you have medicine? And he could hear the desire for the medicine in her voice. Yep. And that was kind of where she messed up. I mean, obviously, if somebody's asking for medicine, that means they need it for someone.
Someone they care about, but too, the way she said it.
In that sense, he knows he's hooked her.
Yeah, and so he can easily send his henchman, Troy Baker, off to go get the meds. And I had a note for, he said, this is not code, go get the meds. This is the second time we've seen they got the jump on someone's situation where the people on the other side of it are like, I am not sending you a secret message, do what they say.
And surprisingly, the guy does end up doing it.
Yeah. So yeah, he convinces her to go into a sheltered area and start a fire. Well, let him start a fire so that they can both huddle for warmth. She gets David to drag the deer into there with them. They sit around the fire and she gets a chance to talk to or ask questions of David, and he gets to, I don't know, reveal most of what he is to her.
And there's a lot of scenes where he talks a lot and Ellie mostly just listens. She's good at getting people to talk, and I think because she is a kid or a child in their eyes, they reveal maybe too much to her because she is really intelligent and she picks up on his vibe right away. So I have a clip of the scene where they're sitting around the fire and he tells her a little bit about his past.
I'm a decent man, just trying to take care of the people who rely on me.
You're their leader?
Wasn't my choice. It was theirs, but yes.
They chose to follow you. Is this some weird cult thing?
Well, you sort of kind of got me there. I am a preacher, but just pretty standard Bible stuff. What?
The whole world ended and you still believe that shit.
I actually started believing after the world ended.
She's got his number right away. So you're a cult leader, basically. He kind of agrees that he is.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is just my personal affectation, but whenever someone says I'm decent or I'm good, it's like, are you though? Like, if you say it, does that mean it's not true?
If you need to clarify that as a preacher cult leader, you're good, then
let other people tell you you're good. Like,
I don't think I've ever went up to somebody and been, oh yeah, I'm a really good person.
I'm good, you should do what I want.
This is a little interesting clue into Ellie, that she's an atheist, or at least agnostic, doesn't believe in God or any of that bullshit. And I know that I've mentioned a couple of times in previous episodes that Paul and I are atheists. I do think it's important that maybe we tell our stories about becoming atheists, because though I don't think every single religious organization is at its core a terrible thing, I do think that religious organizations are kind of set up to funnel people who want to hurt children and other vulnerable communities, because they are automatically trusted, and we have seen time and time again that this is the case, that often it is the people that we put our whole trust into are the ones that are doing some of the more terrible things. So Paul and I wanted us to kind of talk about why we became atheists.
Did you want me to start that, or did you want to start?
I can start.
Okay.
There wasn't a specific moment where I was like, yes, I am obviously an atheist, but I remember several moments in my early childhood where I just wasn't convinced by the process of being religious. Part of it was because my parents didn't actively go to church. They were spiritual. They did give us like some of the books of the classic Christian stories and stuff like that, but I didn't have to go to church every Sunday. And whenever I would go spend the night at somebody's house on a Saturday, and then Sunday we'd have to get up and I'd have to go to church with my friends, which I never really did, and we would have to go to Sunday school. And I remember always, kids will be kids, kind of being mocked for my non-knowledge of some of the Bible stories. And so that kind of started my skepticism of, oh, you preach all of these things that, be kind, do all this stuff. But if you're not part of that group, even if you kind of go there, there isn't a real welcoming feel. It feels very insincere often. Then as I aged, my brother became very religious, and I would sometimes attend their Bible studies. And I just remember being like, yeah, I just don't believe any of this stuff. Like, why do you need this? And people would come up to me and tell me their like horrible stories. I was like 14. Like, I was molested and blah, 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 blah. Like, straight up, I was a complete stranger to these places. And people would tell me how the Lord saved them because of all these terrible things that happened. And I was like, dude, you need to get like real help.
Also, the Lord created the world in which that terrible thing happened, so I'm going to give him a solid dose of that blame.
So really, it was kind of a lot of little moments where I just didn't feel that feeling of connectedness. I always felt like an outsider in those moments. And then I remember actually having a conversation with Andrew about religion. He kind of guided me towards, well, like, it sounds like you don't really believe in any of this stuff. And I'm like, no. And then I had a term for it, kind of. And then Paul, I feel like you had done a lot more study. And I was like, oh yeah, sounds like that's what I am. I guess I'm an atheist. So it was more like in college when it actually clicked, because I think in rural Alaska, you just don't have terms for it because nobody talks about it. So I knew I didn't believe it, but I didn't have a word for it.
That's pretty cool. You always just were there. You just didn't know that other people had ideas for that too.
Yeah, exactly.
So my experience is pretty vastly different. I guess I could say that I started off where a household where my dad was Catholic and my mom was Lutheran, and my mom was very anti-Catholic, so she made sure that my sister and I never had to do the Catholic stuff. We moved a lot. Dad was military, so I actually went through the confirmation process 3 times before I was finally confirmed.
Whoa.
And so by the 3rd time, I was kind of jaded because I knew every goddamn thing they were talking about better than almost the people teaching it, and I still didn't get the credit for it. And at the same time, I
didn't get the credit.
God knows that I've done this thrice. That's as many times as Peter denied Jesus. At the same time, the pastor would have a little section in the middle for kids where all the kids would come up, and he had a little hand puppet, and he like just taught, a daily life lesson that related to the Bible somehow. And this particular lesson, basically the core of it was, if you have faith in Jesus, then you will get anything you want, phrased in an if-then kind of way. And I was like, oh, well, I definitely do. So obviously, this girl that I'm attracted to will date me now. So I called her up and I was like, hey, Mary, do you want to go on a date? And she's like, oh, no, thanks. And I was like, cool, have a nice day. Click. I think I've made a wrong life choice here somewhere. And so
God does not exist.
It was a very short road from that to God does not exist.
This is like hilarious because I feel like boys do things differently than girls sometimes when it comes to religion. Because my brother became religious primarily, I think, to get with girls.
It is
it sounds
a solid
so
way
wrong,
to be in the
but
same room with females that you can actually talk to. So
yeah, he would get a crush on a girl and he would join their church. So he was Mormon at one point,
Oh, wow.
and then he started going to this other church.
So he was bar hopping, but at
Kind
churches.
of. There have actually been some studies done with the Dalai Lama, actually, where they do an MRI and ask him to do certain things like pray. And he has a part of his brain that lights up when he performs those actions. And then they ask an atheist or somebody who doesn't believe in God to do similar things, and they don't get that same light up in that region of the brain.
I remember this, yeah.
It seems as if there are some people that are more prone to belief, like genetically, they're more prone to belief, and they probably get a positive hormonal reaction to doing the actions that come with belief, like the breathing and the praying and all that stuff.
Yeah, didn't that same paper have them like stimulate that part of people's brains and have them be like, oh, I feel like God's in the room now?
I don't remember that aspect of it, but that would make sense.
We'll have to look it up, but I think that was also a part of it.
Wow, yeah. And I don't think I've ever in my entire life felt like there was a presence around me.
The most spiritual I ever felt was I was feeling kind of miserable in college because everyone goes through phases like that. I went on a walk. I laid down in some snow because I had everything you need to just lay down in the snow. I was looking up at the sky, and then a beautiful aurora appeared around me, and instead of the long ribbons that they do, it looked like a circle of them. And so I sort of felt like each pillar of light streaming up in that circle was one of the Norse pantheon or something. And I was like, what's up, Odin?
Oh, that's cool. I do feel like ancient religions are more interesting.
Yeah. I recently read that, heard a biblical scholar say that the New Testament specifically is fan fiction of people alive at that time based off of Greek mythology. And my only thought was, it definitely has that vibe of being a poorly written fan fiction, and it has none of the good stuff of Greek fiction.
That's great. Well, I love it. All right, we can move on from that discussion.
All right,
now.
So yes, we got this David guy. He describes how he went from Pittsburgh, where another Fedra city went down, and then collecting a group of people as they kept getting pushed by raiders to worse and worse locations. So they ended up at a freaking resort community in Colorado. And he says everything happens for a reason, like they always do.
And Ellie's definitely not buying his everything happens for a reason talk. She's definitely kind of getting stone-faced, giving him those sassy teenager looks of like, like rolling her eyes.
I'm pretty sure that she's had to deal with religious people even at Fedra, so she's probably dealt with this kind of idiot before. When he said there's no such thing as luck, my first thought was, there's no such thing as luck, says a guy who went from teaching math to eating people. Like,
yeah,
you've had a very downward fall, my friend.
Well, later when he uses he's like always had a violent heart. So I always wonder if he was maybe like a pedo, even early on.
And honestly, this is the one type of Christian that I think should stay Christian, is if you believe Christianity keeps you a good person, keep doing it, please. I don't want bad people in my life. And if that's your only way to not be a bad person, fucking do it.
Yeah, I mean, some people need those extreme ideas of consequences to keep them from doing terrible things.
Yeah, I personally don't believe that you can be a good society if you believe that there's an ultimate authority. I think that the Euthyphro dilemma that the Greeks also had asks the most important question, which is the way they phrase it. Is it good because God says so? Or is it good outside of God and therefore God doesn't decide what's good? That's a very important question, and I don't think you can be an authority and a judge on good. If you're the authority, you say, my power is.
Yeah, you are the authority, so you're telling people what's good, but that doesn't mean it's innately good.
Exactly. I've also been doing the Golden Compass series recently.
Oh, I love the Golden Compass series.
Yeah.
His Dark Materials,
So
yeah.
But yes, a lot of what David was doing seemed at this point to be him trying to trap her or trick her, because at this point of the story where he says there's no such thing as luck, he starts to reveal that a member of his group has been killed by what he believes to be, and quite correct, Joel and Ellie taking out this guy who stabbed Joel from behind. And so the community want revenge, and so Ellie finally knows like what's going on here right as other Joel comes out with the meds.
James! He's got the drop on her.
Yep. But David commands James to give the meds and let her go. And that makes sense because she's probably not going to be expert at hiding her trails, so they can just track her.
Yeah, he's definitely conniving. Mm-hmm. He takes that moment to do a moment of trust. I feel like he wants her for his. He takes a lot of extreme measures to keep her alive.
Yeah.
Because she's healthy, she's smart, all those things that his disgusting pedo brain is like, yes, I need this.
And so that overrides the other instinct that everyone else in his core group has, which is, we can't have dead weight, we need to eat people.
Or if you don't want to eat her and kill her, just let her go. James says that. And he's like, nope.
Can't do that either.
Gotta keep her. So he lets Ellie go, and she runs through the woods with the medicine that James has brought and given to her, and finds Joel. He's not looking good. She pulls up his shirt, and there's the stab wound. And this is what Paul was talking about in the previous episode, where the stab wound really does look like it's a bite wound.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate for him later. If somebody actually sees it, they might think that he had been bit by a zombie. She doesn't know what to do. It's a perfect moment of what would happen in a post-apocalypse. You've got the stuff,
now what?
But you don't know what to do with it. For example, I used to give our dog Roland prednisone, and so I'd have to give him a shot every month. And you have to be really careful that you don't get air in the space between like the needle in the holding location for the liquid, so that the air doesn't go into the person's bloodstream, because you can cause all kinds of terrible issues. You could kill a person putting air into like a vein or something.
So that would explain why in TV shows they like squeeze the needle and make liquid go out.
It. Yeah, so or they tap it. They're tapping the air up to the top, and then they squeeze it and the air comes out.
That seems less wasteful than the first way.
So I'm automatically like, oh God, like somehow she does it right. I guess there wouldn't be like a vein directly in the wound. So then she's like, I don't know what to do with this. She sucks the medicine into the syringe and shoves it into Joel's, like directly onto the wound. And it just gives me the heebie-jeebies to watch that.
Where would you have stabbed Joel? I mean with the needle, not the stab wound.
I guess teenager brain, that makes sense. It's like close to the area, but I feel like if you're giving somebody antibiotics or something like that, it has to be in a vein, right? So he would more quickly get the whatever drug it is, like in the arm vein.
Okay. So you've answered the underlying question. I was sort of wondering if this is supposed to be intramuscular or intravenous. It sounds like this specifically should be intravenous, so.
Yeah, I have no idea what it is. She just said, give me something for infection, and it's a liquid.
Yeah.
maybe it's a local antibiotic. I mean,
We're also dealing
it's hard
with,
to know.
Yeah, like it's 20 years after the last medical facility has shut down, so they're scraping the bottom of the barrel, presumably.
Yeah, but thankfully it all works out in the end because he's our hero, and of course it's going to.
Yeah, there's a whole other episode left.
Also, in this particular scene, we get some of that bittersweet music in the background, the Joel and Ellie music. She lays down next to him, pulls on my heartstrings a little bit there when she needs that comfort, that moral support, but he can't
do anything.
Verbally give it, so she's getting a little bit of physical comfort from him, even though he can't reciprocate. And it makes you worried and feel sad for what is to come for Ellie in the future of this episode. So they cut back to the community, and they're always at Todd's Steakhouse in the lodge, and you see a woman come into the kitchen. She's got 2 big cans of tomatoes, and she says that they're basically on their last tomatoes, and a guy is carrying some cut up cubes of meat into the kitchen, and he sets it down, and she looks at it and she says, "What kind of meat is that?"
Which is a very interesting question if you didn't have the context.
And he goes, "Oh, it's venison." So here we have the venison as human meat code. I'm not sure if this woman is in on the secret. It doesn't seem like she is. This is also the wife of the guy who got killed. She's pretty distinctive because she's the only woman with like super short hair in the community. And I think she's kind of guessing. I think most of the people probably have already guessed where the meat's coming from, but I guess ignorance can sometimes protect our psyche. Yeah. So people are choosing not to know.
We've had 6 wakes, but 0 burials, and we said we were starving, but now we're okay. I'm not going to ask any questions.
We get into the dining area, and all the people are eating the human meat. And David bursts into the doors, and he's just happy as a clam. I'm providing for the people. Look, the meat you're eating is deer. We've got a deer.
It's not venison this time, guys. It's deer.
And he talks about...
Plus, I've got a whole new girlfriend.
I've got a new girlfriend prospect. My life is great. And he tells everybody in the room that they found Ellie and Joel, and the daughter of the man who Joel killed was like, "We gotta kill them both." And he goes up to her, and he just straight up, bam, smacks that little girl out of the chair. Her mom stands up to do something and then gets cowed to sit back down. And he says this like really gross line about, "Even though your dad's dead, I'll always be your father." And he's definitely been giving off pedo vibes, just because I guess I just get that feeling sometimes from pastors anyway. But he, in this moment, you're like, oh yeah, he means more than just like, "I'm your daddy." He means, "I'm your daddy," which is, I've always never been comfortable with that term when women use it for their significant other.
It's so
He's
gross.
my daddy. It is gross. But what's funny is that is a big term for Pedro Pascal, is he's everybody's daddy or zaddy. And so
where did that come from? Zad.
I can't remember the exact, I think it's sexy daddy put together.
People.
Anyway, I'm not really one for that term for a significant other because of this kind of thing.
Yeah, blurring those lines. And I just want to say that anytime somebody resorts to hitting, not just children or the defenseless people under your control, which is a whole extra level of bad, but like anytime you take a swing instead of talk, you have lost all of the moral high ground, all of the intellectual high ground. You are a stupid slappy monkey. You are not a human at that moment. You are a piece of shit. And then you deserve to be hit back.
I like how you said you've lost all moral high ground. Yeah, because you've used violence instead of a very simple thing that you could do, which is talk through a situation. I have our reactions to that scene here because I think we're appropriately shocked in the moment. Fucking dickwad. Douche magoo. I'm your daddy now.
Ugh.
We need more women.
Big old pile of meat.
now eat your dad.
Yep. Significant eye contact with me and Marcy right there.
Christ, the living schmeat that's in our bowl. Ugh. Oh, that guy knows what he's eating. Yeah, it's funny. I forgot that I said that, but yeah, she's literally eating her own dad as she's defending her dad against this pedo pastor. It's pretty fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah, that guy, he should be hitting himself at that moment.
Ah!
I'm so sorry, I'm making you eat your dad. There's also a part, I think, just before the girl says, we will bring that man to justice, talking about Joel. And in my mind, I was like, did you name your stomach Justice?
Oh, Paul, you're much better at, like, coming up with these pre-planned jokes than me. You can see in this moment, too, sort of what I talked about in the very first scene, how cowed everybody in the community is by him. And you kind of gotta wonder, obviously, his main group of people know how violent he is, because later when he goes to kill Ellie, he's the one that is going to do the killing blow for Ellie. He's the one that has the butcher knife originally. And I just feel like there's been many moments where the community has seen him have one of these temper tantrums, and because you were thought that you were supposed to love this person, you just let things go. And I'm sure it was like a slow build.
Yeah.
You just slowly kept doing more and more violent things, and people just kind of get immune or inured to the violence after a certain point.
Yeah, and then he sort of takes that as a free pass to get worse and worse, up to the point where now he's just openly slapping children in front of the whole group.
Yeah, I always find this so interesting. It's such a weird human mentality to, even if you don't agree with something, if you look around and no one else is doing anything, you don't do anything. Because I do think often, even if you are the one to speak up, then you're the one that gets fucked over, because if one person had stood up and no one else had backed them up, then they would be the next meal on the plate.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe they suspect that.
It's also another good contrast between this community and Maria's settlement, how jarring it is to think of kind of the utopia that Tommy's settlement has created, and this community where you have this person who's basically a dictator who has basically become a horrible cannibal. Like, this is the only way we can be. I understand that he doesn't think maybe you can't eat other things, but really, what does it take for you to eat someone else?
Do you think that when they're eating, they do a prayer and they're like, blessed is the body of Jesus, while they're looking at human meat and not seeing that it is?
Probably.
Also, your contrast point, it goes back to what we were saying earlier in the episode, because the Maria community has the outside reputation of being scary and mean and nasty, but they're actually pretty cool. And then this guy is trying to sell his community and is like, we're good people.
Yeah, come be our sheep.
Yeah.
So they cut again to Ellie waking up next to Joel. She checks his condition, gives him the final shot directly into his wound of the antibiotic or whatever it is, goes upstairs, cares for the horse, which I like seeing that she recognizes that the horse needs to eat and drink, and she's standing kind of in front of the garage where the horse is stabled and hears a bunch of crows fly off. And immediately, good situational awareness, she recognizes that that usually means that somebody's nearby, and she sneaks off to kind of check it out and recognizes that the guys who she'd met have followed her back to this little town that she's holed up in with Joel. So runs back to Joel, wakes Joel up, and is kind of getting him ready so that she can go off and distract them. And I have a clip from that scene because it's really dramatic.
Joel, wake up. Joel, wake the fuck up, Joel. Okay, look at me. There are men coming, okay? I'm gonna lead them away from you. But if anybody makes it down here, you fucking kill them. You got it? Joel, do not fall asleep.
a really great scene of Ellie taking charge, waking Joel up, telling him the situation,
giving him orders,
giving him a way to, like, protect himself. You can see, like, he does wake up, but he looks bad. Like, he's barely conscious, really. But he hears the orders, and so she goes upstairs, she runs back upstairs. The Foley artists are really good in this TV show. Just listening to some of the scenes in there where she's not talking, and you hear the knife go shing, so you know that she's pulling out a knife. Even though sometimes I feel like that's really dumb, it's nice when you, like, listen to it on a podcast, because you can tell what's happening. And her running down the stairs.
Yeah, in the earlier clip where they were talking outside in the snow, you could hear them squishing the snow. It's really good Foley.
It's good. So she runs upstairs, and then she drags this giant wardrobe, the wardrobe my NPC would be wearing on their back, over the opening to the basement, and goes and gets her horsey, and once again, she runs out of the garage on top of the horse. She's like, okay, let's do this, and she starts shooting at the bad guy. She does this so often in the show, I feel like she needs to practice shooting from a horse.
You bring up a good point.
James, the fucker, gets ahead of her a little bit, and he's a much better shot than she is, takes aim, and BAM! Shoots the horsey! And the horsey goes down, and I'm super sad.
It's a very good way to illustrate that you're not really a good person, or you're not on the good side in a movie or a TV show when you just casually kill animals. It definitely makes sense in combat. Like, you've seen, I'm pretty sure even good guys will sometimes just take the legs off a horse that's getting them, but usually they're, like, super outnumbered, and so they have to resort to this kind of cruelty, because otherwise you're just not going to accept it.
Yeah, certainly in a show, when an animal dies like this, I'm always upset. But, like you said, I feel like in a battle situation, it makes sense to take out a person's transport, and a horse is definitely a significant advantage to somebody in a fight. So
for sure,
it makes sense to take it out, but I was super sad. The horse goes down. Ellie goes flying off of it. She's kind of knocked out from hitting the ground at full speed from a horse. And James and his posse kind of walk up to her. They've got some hard stone faces on. And one of the other guys just says, just do it. And James is about to shoot her on the ground. And then our creepy pedo pastor comes up and shoots in the air and stops them from killing her.
So this is at least the third time he's said, I want her alive, to these people.
Mm-hmm. He takes two people so that they can drag the horse back to the community, and he's carrying Ellie, and he sets up the rest of the guys to go looking door to door for Joel.
Yeah, there was a cool line he says there. You're so hungry for vengeance, deliver it. It was well delivered for who they are. To me, I was thinking that the gunman's like, hey, I've got your justice delivery for you. And Joel's like, oh, I'll take that justice. Boom.
A justice pizza. It's, you know, it's a completely human meat pizza.
Yeah, don't eat it.
I got the image of a human meat delivery man. Anyway, just fingers and toes on your pizza.
Yeah, we've split up the bad guy group, and we've got the guys that are still delivering justice are going house to house trying to find signs. Hey, is this your pizza? Yeah, you get to see a little bit of the set design of this empty, ruined village. You get to see destroyed houses. You get shots of Joel, he looks like he's conserving his strength to me. Is that how you'd see it?
He's just resting. He feels like shit.
Yeah, getting as much rest as he can.
He can't do anything. He can't follow Ellie at this point, or at least he doesn't think he can until he gets the adrenaline rush.
And what better than Marcy's wardrobe being pushed aside to do that?
Yeah, he's laying there and he hears the wardrobe go, and you can see him kind of panic, but he does not have a panic attack. Panic attacks are over for the rest of the series. So that was a one episode thing until he makes the decision that he's going to protect Ellie, that he's okay with failing, that he's like, I love her, this is okay. And once he had made that decision too, I think all of the subsequent violence that comes from Joel,
he's all in,
happened in that panic attack episode.
Yep. So yeah, Joel hears the wardrobe move, that activates him, and so he fights this guy, and it's really brutal. He sneaks up from behind on him, and like he's choking him out. The guy's got blood in his teeth, and
stabs him in the neck with a
neck.
knife.
Yep. And he's got this like rictus grin with the bloody teeth. And so that was, Marcy, where your note, you think he's happy he died. That's where I was thinking that all of the people in this group want to die.
Absolutely. The grin is just so horrific, and it stays on his face the whole time. And there's a couple of quick cutscenes between Joel and the dead guy where Joel's just like looking at this guy's dead face, and it was almost like he purposefully smiled as he was dying. I mean, you see the smile kind of enter his face, and I think that they aren't happy, and he's almost just like, finally a release from having to follow this horrible man and make decisions that I didn't want to make.
And nobody stands up to
humans.
This dude. Yeah.
So I think he's just relieved, but his relief is pretty fucking creepy.
So then we cut to where Ellie is. She's now in what seems to be the back of the kitchen area where they have a cage set up, which I think that's just normal in barbecue huts, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's normal to just have a cage that humans can't get in or out of.
It's perfectly fine. No questions there. I just watched the last season of You. The whole thing of this story is that he was raised in this bookshop that has a prison cell in the basement, because everything does, apparently. And he would use that to capture people and try and convince them that he's a good person so that he can let them go. And it's the whole dilemma is you cannot believe a guy who's got you captured, and he can't believe anything you say because you're just trying to get out. It's an impossible conundrum. So
yes, exactly.
So David has just put Ellie in the same conundrum, and he's trying to convince her that he can protect her, even though she's already got protection, and like she can do stuff for herself pretty well. She's shown that to him, but no, he has to be her boyfriend.
Yeah, and I get so frustrated watching these scenes. Because first of all, again, it's one of these adults that recognizes that she's special. Again, unlike Joel, they're focusing on how all of these things can be of benefit to them instead of caring more about Ellie, right? And this is why Joel is the ultimate protector, and you cannot take his place because you're gross, disgusting, pedophile, pasture, loser, cult leader.
I love that you often say pasture instead of pastor. Because, like, he'd be better off as pastor, honestly.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to say. I don't know why the word pastor. I have some kind of Midwest type accent from my parents. It's like really hard for me to say pastor.
And it's fine.
I can do it, maybe.
You just did it. You just proved it to the world, so we can move on. I forgot to also mention that when Ellie woke up, she had the perfect angle to see that whoever was cut up in the last time, their ear fell on the floor and nobody picked it up. So she fully has them dead to rights based on that. And that makes it even harder for this David Protector gambit to work at all, because she knows that they eat people, which then he has to admit to. And like the way he admits it to her, it almost sounded to me like he was asking for brownie points for not letting people murder her specifically. And it's like, that's not brownie points worthy, buddy.
Yeah, and I think we should just contain this scene with Ellie altogether, because there is a lot of cuts in here. But yeah, he continues along with this, trying to convince her that he's a good guy. He's still playing the good guy, like, I can protect you. This is how we're similar. Like, that was a whole weird thing. How do you even know? You've talked to her for 5 minutes total.
Yeah.
She didn't really reveal very much about herself to him in the fire scene. So he's like, I know you have a violent heart.
That's right, yep.
I don't even tell my flock this, but he basically reveals to her that he doesn't really believe in God. He kind of worships cordyceps, and he uses some scripture type terms with her in relation to the cordyceps. But he feels like they are worth worshiping because they're fruitful and they multiply, and just some really wacko like he keeps escalating the crazy, thinking that this is going to be the thing that convinces her, right?
I just have to lay it all out there.
Getting even more crazy. But Ellie, being the smart person that everybody has been telling her that she is, recognizes that the only way she can get him to come closer to her is if she starts pretending as if she's softening to his arguments, and she starts bringing him in. She's reeling him in at this point because he's really bearing his soul to her in a way to try to get her to trust him, because this has probably worked 1,000 times for him. And so he starts walking closer to the cage, and then Ellie starts walking closer to him. And kind of in the moment, I remember being like, I hope she's not convinced by this, even though I know she's smarter than that. I just don't want her to fall for his crazy 28 on charisma, like, abilities.
Yeah, because he's worshiping elder gods right now.
And so he gets closer, he puts his little gross, creepy pedo hand into the cage a little bit, and she knows, like, this is the way that I gotta get close to him. So she touches him, and then he starts rubbing her hand, and this really skeeves me out, and she puts her other hand on top of his hand, and this is, like, one of the most satisfying moments in the episode. So she's reeled him in, she's touching him, and he's being creepy, and then she takes his finger and just rams it up and breaks his finger and reaches for his keys. So she's trying to get the keys while he's hurt, but then, of course, he gets the better of her physically, grabs her head, bangs it against the cage, and this is where he really reveals himself, right?
Yeah, he uses that C word that only Australians are allowed to say.
Yeah, so the next words out of his mouth are, "You little cunt."
And Marcy can say it.
And I was like, oh yeah, I can say it because I'm repeating what a fucking asshole, douchebag, mofo
Piece of
just
shit.
said.
Yep.
And he reveals himself. He knows that there's no way, based on this interaction, and he is absolutely right, that he's not going to get anywhere with her.
And she has to die now because she knows too much.
Absolutely. He's revealed everything about himself to her. So he, again, says, remember when you asked if I'm going to cut you up into little pieces? Well, I sure am. And then she, of course, has one last smart mouth little thing to say as he leaves the room, something along the lines of, go ahead and tell your group that a little girl broke your fucking fingers off! And I was like, yes!
Yes.
She's even defiant when she's the most weak.
Yeah,
you know? I love
she's
that.
not going to give up. She's going to die fighting. So that's the main part of the Ellie being in the prison cell sequence. So then we can cut back to Joel. He has managed to knock out one of the people, and then using that body as a possible distraction, he sneaks up on the other guy. So he has murdered the first, and the other two are captured. So there goes the away team. He's captured them for torturing.
Yeah. He's so fucking scary in this scene. So we have to play our original reactions to this. It's just pure gold because this is how I feel about this scene in a nutshell.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't stop the Joel train.
Yeah, buddy. You just got beat, and guess who's gonna torture you now?
Where are they?
This is why everybody was afraid of Tess, because of Joel. Oh, sorry. I actually stabbed Andrew in the junk in my fear. Ooh, that's scary.
Joel's really mean in this. I forgot that he did something like this.
Of course he did. Ooh. Oh. Ah.
I love the little background noise we can hear, like, oh, Jesus!
I'm sorry, I know extreme violence shouldn't make me laugh so much, but this is my reaction to horror. Also, you want these guys to go down, and Joel's form of justice is satisfying but scary.
Yeah, you know that what's happening is objectively bad, and you also know how they got there and how it's necessary to get out of it, and that's probably a good synopsis for the whole next episode, too.
Yeah, absolutely. The part where he jabs his knife into the guy's patella, and then he's threatening him that he'll rip it off if he doesn't tell him where on the map where Ellie is. And then he does pull his patella off, and the other guy is like watching all this stuff happen, and then he shoves the knife that he just ripped the guy's fucking knee off with into his mouth, and he has to point with the bloody knife on the map with his mouth. And again, just a little bit of a callback, because this scene is super reminiscent of a couple of episodes back with the older couple, where he's asking one person where it is on the map and confirming with another person. So this is how it could have gone down with that older couple, if there wasn't a sweet little old plump lady in that cabin that fed him soup and knew what hospitality fucking was.
Yeah. I know that Joel must have a good concept for the person that he's doing this to, because I would have worried that putting a knife in this guy's mouth, he would try to slash me or stab me with it. But Joel had no fear of that.
You actually talk about that in the next part of our reaction clip. No. Like, I didn't add it in, but it was funny. We argued about this actually while we were watching this show, because it's like, I don't think somebody could stab you with a knife. Like, you just don't get enough velocity with your neck muscles to, like, stab effectively.
It's not about effective. It's about what you have and what you can do. And that's not much in this situation.
Yes. And then he's just like so cold-blooded. So the guy who's pointing on the map gives him a location, and he kills that guy with a knife, walks over to the armoire sitting next to him, grabs a bat off of there, and is walking up to the other guy, and the other guy's like...
Suddenly he's pleading to Joel's humanity, which...
Yes.
Neither of them have humanity.
Yes. And he's like, you didn't even ask me! You didn't even ask me where she is! And he just kind of smiles, and this is where, you feel bad rooting for Joel a little bit, because he's a psycho killer.
Qu'est-ce que c'est?
And so he goes, it's okay, I believe him. Bam! And he, like, totally takes that guy out, kills him.
Yeah, so at least he didn't want to, like, torture for torture's sake.
Yeah, I mean, he got the information, and this guy is not gonna live.
Yep.
And he's super practical about these things. And you just, in these moments, you can imagine, like, think of the kind of person he could have been. If you can imagine Joel as a really big bad guy that he could have become if he didn't have Sarah in his backstory, he would be Negan from A Walking Dead, because Negan's got his baseball bat with the barbed wire on it called Lucille, and he is just smiling when he's killing people, and he uses violence as a good tool. Like, he uses fear and violence well to control his populace.
Yeah, I also couldn't help but notice that he's resorting to the last resort while going to a resort.
You're just like hitting all cylinders today with these jokes.
So that's those two sections. We know Joel knows where to go now. We know where Ellie's gonna go next.
We kind of skipped around with the Ellie scenes, but of those scenes, we end on the little cunt words that we don't like. And then they cut again to Joel, who's kind of walking through a winter storm and kind of looking pretty rough, is following a blood trail.
Very convenient.
I guess he knew what city they were in, so he's able to make it to the resort. But now he sees a big blood trail that takes him to their shack where they keep bodies.
The cold storage, perhaps?
Cold storage, there you go. I said cult storage, and then I realized you said cold storage, but I was like, yes, obviously it's the cult storage room. And first thing he finds is Ellie's backpack and a bunch of other people's things, and I think that clues him in. He's got his like flashlight, and he's like, wait a second. He just feels the creepy.
I know what's going on
and
here.
He turns around. Yeah, he turns around, and there's a bunch of people all trussed up like they're animals hanging from the ceiling, along with the horse. So that's kind of a really creepy scene. And despite knowing what was going to happen in these scenes, I immediately start getting that anxiety that you feel when you're playing the game of like, we gotta find Ellie, we gotta help Ellie. especially in the game, certainly you know that she's gonna live, but you don't know. I mean, they could have killed her off in that moment.
Okay, so what you just said made me come up with a good question. In video games, when you play them, do you feel that the game will always follow your schedule, or do you explore when it says, like, you gotta go get this person, or do you go on the main quest?
I think I would probably really annoy people. Certain games, I do the main quest. So I'm pretty sure I stuck really close to the timeline because I was incredibly invested in these two characters for all of the reasons that we've talked about in the show. Particularly, they make you love them when you're walking along, they're telling jokes to each other, and when you're in a situation where you really want to save her. I think when I was playing The Last of Us, I actually did follow the storyline completely through the end. Classically, when I play video games, I will explore every inch of every map. I'll bump up against the areas, where you're not supposed to go, and I'll be like, click, 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 as like walking along. Because I feel like, remember old games like Zelda? You literally had to touch every part of the wall to find like secret passageways and different things.
Like the Castlevanias have the wall chicken that like heals you if you find it.
So I will search every area completely before moving on, even if it's like, we're gonna die. Like, the screen is literally shaking. I'm like, what's over in this corner? Like...
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm terrible. If there's not an active countdown, or if the screen isn't pushing you to the right or whatever, I'm going to be looking for stuff.
Exactly. I do know that The Last of Us is one of the games that I beat the fastest because I didn't do as much of that. I really wanted to get to the next story aspect of the game. And most games aren't that engaging in the storyline. And part of the fun of playing a game is all these other things that you can do, like mini games and things like that. But truly, The Last of Us was a cinematic event that you got to kind of like do other stuff in. And I rarely find that in games anymore. I don't think I've found one that was that effective with me because they always want to do open world stuff, which I get. It allows you to have a lot of stuff to do, to feel like you got your bang for your buck. I think they did an incredible job of making you care about the characters so you didn't care about the game stuff. You weren't trying to get the next reward of, oh, I opened a chest.
Right.
The next reward was learning what happened to these people.
Like it actually felt that my priorities were in line with the story, that if I'm looking for the alcohol bottles, for example, that means that I am trying to get a Molotov or a healing kit for the next thing that I'm doing. It is for completing the story.
Exactly. And I also feel like because they limited the amount of resources, your desperation to find resources was warranted because you're trying to save Ellie or you're trying to get to the next spot, and you really had that desperation for stuff, not because it's like, oh, I'm going to upgrade my armor to the next level so that I can go off to this side world planet and murder a few people, get some stuff.
Kill the Cow King, whatever.
You wanted it because you needed it to survive. It was an ingenious game because it made you care more than just about resources. Anyway, I don't remember.
Your anxiety.
Oh, Joel. Yeah. We get to the scene that also causes me much anxiety, which is they come into the room. It's good old Doubter James, Doubting Thomas.
Not doubting enough.
And they pull her out of the cage and she's screaming desperately. This is breaks your soul into pieces as she's like, ah, no, get off me, ah! She's like screaming. And they throw her down on the butcher table and David's got the butcher knife and he's gonna smack her in the head. I can just see it. And she's, again, fucking smart. She's like,
not waiting for Joel to save
her. I'm infected! Yes, that is like the smartest fucking things to say. And then she says, now you're infected too. He does pause, and there's a very clear moment where the camera zooms in on him hitting the butcher knife down next to her head and letting it go. So he leaves a butcher knife next to Ellie, which is, okay, we know she can get out of this now. She's smart. And so they're talking, James and David, and the next moment, guess what? Ellie's got a knife. Ellie's got a knife.
She takes revenge for that poor horse.
She sure does. She Choppa chops Mr. Doubting James right in the neck and escapes the butcher room. This is a really long sequence of her escaping the psycho.
Which is accurate to the game, too. It felt like a really long sequence of trying to hide from him and figure out his pattern.
It was as hard to play as it was to watch. The whole time, I remember gripping that controller with my life, and you're trying to avoid him, You do find, I think, a knife. You do stab him, kind of like in the scene here. And he does a lot of waxing poetical about how he's gonna not kill her, that she's gonna be, we're both gonna make it out alive in this, and tells her that she's essentially gonna become his slave and do terrible things to her. Brave girl that she is, takes the first move. She doesn't wait for him to find her. She attacks him, is able to stab him, but he's stronger than her, gets her down on the ground, and I'm just like, the building is literally burning around this guy, and the first thing he does is take out his dick. I mean,
yeah,
it's fucked up. I mean, I know there's people like that. He is getting such a thrill out of victimizing her that he doesn't see anything else happening around him. And it's scary, because you know there's people out there like that. Yeah. I remember this scene so clearly in the game where the butcher knife is within reach of Ellie. And you know how these games on the PlayStation are? You have to like push A, B, A, B, A, B, or like X as fast as you possibly can. And I remember failing on that scene to get the fucking butcher knife because you're just so stressed. You have to desperately push a button to get her to get that butcher knife.
Yeah, you don't just press it once or press it a few times.
And it's a long time. I felt like it lasted forever that you're pushing this button.
We're still pushing that button today.
But she gets it, and this is like such a horrible, heartbreaking scene, because Ellie has to kill someone in the most violent way that you could ever have to kill. So she butcher chops him to death. And if you've listened to my intro, you can hear the game sequence of that. And there's a little change between the game and the show, where in the game, Joel actually arrives when she's like butchering the guy with the butcher knife. But in the show, she walks out of the building and then Joel approaches her. So I know I did a lot of talking there, Paul, so if you have anything else to add, you can add it.
I do appreciate that choice because it feels very tropey in TV shows and movies these days for someone to interrupt you at that moment of violent passion that Ellie is rightfully fallen into. So yeah, I like that she's now pulled herself completely out of the situation and Joel doesn't rescue her. He finds her and is there to help pick up the pieces, which, you know, arguably is way more important than the one critical moment.
Yeah, I also think it was a good choice. I think either one of them would have been fine. Yeah. It is a little more jarring to see someone who's come out of this moment is completely shell-shocked. Mm-hmm. I do think it's worth that we listen to that scene where they reunite. Every time I watch it or listen to it, I tear up and I cry because it really is just a heartbreaking reunion because he knows that she's never going to be the same after this. Let's listen to that.
No! Get off of me! Get off!
It's me. Look, it's me. It's me. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay, baby girl. I got you. I got you.
I had goosebumps that whole time.
Yeah, I was just going to say my scalp was tingling. I mean, it's so hard not to cry when you, like, listen to that scene.
It was so good. Like, you could tell she didn't have words. Like, she didn't know what to say or think or feel. She didn't feel safe, but she was, like, coming down to reality.
Yeah, and just she's feeling the relief of at least she can land somewhere safe, but unable to even describe what happened. Again, Joel shows that he can be that person for her where she can land safely. A scene where he takes his jacket off, he puts his jacket over her, and they're kind of holding each other up as they walk away because he's also injured. And it's a fitting end to that kind of episode where they both have gone through all this trauma, and all you can do as humans is hold each other up, try to build each other up instead of tear each other down and eat people. No eating people.
Bad.
So that's it.
That's the episode.
I'm not sure if there's anything else that we can say about how this chapter went versus the game, other than that, again, showrunners are keeping it tight.
I think the only thing I want to add is that when rewatching this episode, I did not want to. Like, there was a whole part of me that was like, this is in many ways the bleakest episode. It's just bad the whole time through. There's no hope that anything's going to get better. It just keeps getting worse and worse until the very last moment when Joel finds her and they prop each other up. Yeah, it was tough to watch.
It is a hard one to watch. Truly, it was one of the scenes from the game that you cannot forget. I think I had already said that at the very beginning. You remember that scene.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's another game where I could be like, oh man, I just remember that scene like it was in front of me, except for in The Last of Us.
Yeah.
They did it justice, but we don't like watching it.
You did a good job, and I'm mad.
It had to happen, but I don't like it. And so I'll finish up with talking about how I'm still planning on doing a live stream of The Last of Us with Steam. Paul will be watching me play, of course. I continue to see that the PC version is glitchy, so I'm not planning on doing it maybe until the glitches have been resolved to a degree. I hope they get that under control at least a month maybe before I do the live stream. But we still have the finale. We still have a kind of wrap-up episode for the whole series or the whole season. So it'll be a while before we get to the live stream, but I think it'll be worth it. We've already seen the finale, and I'm super pumped to talk about it. Again, I think they did a great job, so obviously you're just going to hear us saying how amazing this show is, because it is. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode. It's a sad one, so we probably only listened to this podcast once. But you can email us at idleridepodcast@gmail.com. Also reach us at idleridepodcast on Twitter and at idleridepodcast on Instagram. Please take a moment to rate us on Apple Podcast or wherever your podcasts are downloaded, because that helps other people see that this is a good podcast and it's fun to listen to. But otherwise, we'll see you at the finale. It's gonna be a good one.
See you next time.
See ya.